I think you need to tap into real human emotion, real human passion. And I think if you're telling a story that engages with real human passion, I think people will find it entertaining, they'll find it enjoyable, they'll find it meaningful. And so some of my books are funny and they deal more with that side of things. Some of them, like the book that I just released, they're sad, and there are moments of grief and moments of loss. And I think if you write things like that honestly, people will enjoy it. They'll enjoy crying along with you, as you're grieving over these things. Just like people enjoy laughing with you if you're tapped into real humor. And so I think that's the key. Good morning. Can you
Good
hear me?
morning, Chad. It's so great to meet you, Chad.
Yeah, very nice to meet you as well.
And I'm so glad we can speak. I came across your page on Instagram.
Okay.
And I love speaking to writers and, just to hear your story and how you started writing.
Yeah. So shall I just get into it then?
Yeah, just get into it.
Yeah, I think like a lot of writers, I've enjoyed writing my whole life. I've enjoyed books, stories, a variety of things, and probably got started when I was young, at least in high school, but not vested heavily in it.
Okay.
Wrote some stories, some short works, some poetry. But you get busy with life and you get on with everything.
And academics in school as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did study English literature and history when I was in university. And so, had a strong interest to that point. But you're so busy with the academic side of things, doing the reading and writing for your degree, that you don't get to do much for your own self personally, or at least that's the way it was for me. And then I went on.
Sorry that I interrupt now, but at that stage also, in your mind, did you still think of stories, or did you still notice things that you think, oh, hey, this could be a great story?
I did, and I wasn't thinking in the sense that I might write the stories, but just how you see things and you really admire and appreciate when you see great works, whether it's a film or it's a book, a novel, or even like a human story, like somebody's life story. So I had the appreciation for those things. I went on to study counseling. I have a master's in marriage and family counseling. And so that's obviously, getting beside the behind it into the psychological side of things was a strong interest, and the human part of it. But I got married, had kids. We ended up moving. We've been outside of the United States. I'm an American, but I've been outside of the United States since 2000. So coming up on 25 years this year. And so, yeah, busy with other things. But I think our family would say that the love of stories was more expressed through, telling stories to your children, telling original bedtime stories every night, things like that.
I just wanted to ask if you were probably so great at that.
Yeah, it was always a fun thing. I wrote some short stories for our children. I wrote some things like that, but not thinking that they would ever, see the light of day outside of our family. But always thought, this is something I would like to get back to. This is something that I would love to invest in more. But I think with just work and family, I didn't want to take away from the things I was doing, and it's obviously it's a commitment when you give a lot of time to an art form, no matter what it is.
But sorry, when you were still in school, and I mean, when you were a child, was that sort of a dream? Was that something you thought about? I would love to become a writer one day.
Definitely when I was in high school, the later parts of school, interesting story was we had a writing assignment to write a short story. And I don't remember what year it was. I was probably maybe 15 or 16 years old. And our English teacher had given us an assignment, write that. And after the class, she asked me to come see her in her office. And I didn't know what it was about. And she, when she called me in, she said, "Where did you get this story that you wrote from?" And I said, "I wrote it." And she said, "No, you copied it from somewhere. Obviously, you copied it."
Really?
I was like, "No, I promise you I didn't copy it." And she said, "This was very good. Then if you're telling me the truth, this is very good. And you should consider investing in that." So I think from that moment on, I always had in the back of my mind, this is something I might be able to do at some point. It's something I should get back to. But it was many, many years before I would kind of seriously get into it again.
Okay, so and then you said life happened, and when did you then actually start writing?
Yeah, I would actually say that both personal tragedy and world tragedy was the opportunity to get back into that. We actually lived in the country of Turkey from 2000 until 2020, and then in January of 2020, when I went to go back to return to Turkey, I wasn't allowed back into the country. And I won't get into a lot of the details of that, but I'll just share that, the Turkish government is like many governments of the world. They have their own philosophies and they can be volatile. And so since 2019, they've been removing a good number of Christian foreigners from the country and not allowing them to enter. And so I don't consider myself extremely special because of that. I mean, I have many friends who had the same fate, but after making your home in a country for 20 years, to suddenly have to uproot, that's where we had 3 children. We raised our children there. At that time, we still had one of our children at home. And so we had to make a drastic life change. And I couldn't even return in to see, our home there. I was barred and deported. And
what about your things that were there?
Yeah. And so in January of 2020, we had known because of friends that it might be a possibility that this would happen. So I had made plans to fly ahead of my wife and son. And then if I'd gotten in, they would have flown 2 days later to join in the country.
I see.
But once I didn't get in, we went ahead and canceled those flights. So to give us a little more time to figure out what we wanted to do. And so in March of 2020, which is a familiar date in many people's lives, my wife and son had plans to return to sort through our affairs, and go through the things and make some decisions about what to do with the items, whether to ship them and 2 days before they were supposed to fly, the travel bans, the worldwide COVID travel bans were announced. And so they could have flown at that point to Turkey. But there was a lot of uncertainty if they would be able to leave, and with everything going on, we made the decision to go ahead and cancel those flights and just kind of move forward in there. So I say, we had our own personal tragedy, and then you had the worldwide tragedy of COVID, which affected so many people. And that left me suddenly with a lot of time on my hands, a lot of extra time. I had some things I'd been working on. I'd written some articles, for different websites and things. And so I just thought, well, if I'm ever going to write a book, this is probably the best opportunity I would have to start working.
Because everybody had more time to.
Yeah. I mean, we were all kind of stuck inside, stuck or isolated.
If I might ask, what work did you do in Turkey?
We were involved in helping with the church there. So we were involved in Christian ministry, and just helping with the support and the growth. As you can imagine, Turkey's primarily a Muslim country. And so there are very few Christians there. It's a very small church. And so we had moved there to just encourage and support the church and its growth. primarily working with Turkish Christians and trying to encourage them. And so, yeah, that obviously put me on the wrong radar in the long run,
I can
and we're one of many
imagine.
who've suffered that fate, unfortunately.
Yeah. But okay, so then you started writing, and yeah.
And so the first book I wrote was actually a Christian book in my own name. I don't know if you'll publish this. This interview is taking place under my pen name, Hunter Chadwick.
Yeah.
And
I
I
thought
don't
your
hide.
name was. I thought your name was Hunter. I think I wrote to you, Hunter.
Yeah, and so I don't hide that my real name is Chad Hensley. And I don't hide that, so I don't mind. But probably you would want to publish this under Hunter. So the first book I wrote was under my real name, and it was kind of like thinking through, since we had lived for 20 years outside of America with many dear family and friends back home, what would I want to tell them about what I believe? What would I want to tell them if I ever got to sit down and have a long conversation about what my faith means to me personally? What do I believe? And so I wrote a book called Seeing God for Who He Really Is that was under my name. And it went well. I enjoyed writing it. It was obviously, if you've never written a book before, it's a learning experience. You have to go into it and think about how to compose your thoughts well, and then the editing and getting people to give you feedback on the writing. But I enjoyed their process so much that I knew this is something that I wanted to keep doing. And so in 2021, the door was open for us to travel back overseas, kind of to put a bow on that part of our story. And so we moved to the island of Cyprus, which is, of course, very close to the country of Turkey. In that summer, my wife and son were able to go back and so fortunately, I'm the only one who's not allowed in the country. All of the rest of our family can go. We had some dear friends who sorted through our things and were able to sell things we knew we wanted to sell. So it was just personal effects and things that we had left that my wife and son had to go through. And so they shipped some things back to America. They shipped some things to Cyprus. And we finally kind of closed the doors on our homes and life in Turkey.
Wow.
Fortunately, my wife still enjoys going. She goes when she has a reason to go to fly and see friends there. And all of our children have been able to go back and visit where they grew up. So it's a great blessing.
It's 20, it's 20 years. I mean, it's for them, it's a lifetime.
Yeah. I mean, that was their whole growing up experience. When we moved to Turkey, our first child, our daughter, was 1 year old, and my wife was pregnant with our second. And so, I mean, their entire growing up experience was there in that country. So in 21, we moved to Cyprus, and we've continued to. I still own a business in Istanbul, and I still have connections there. So even though I can't go, we want to continue to do some of the things that we were doing before from here, and we're able to do that. It's not a problem. It hasn't been a problem to this point, so hopefully that'll continue. But our lifestyle is a little bit slower. Istanbul, I don't know if you've ever been, but it's one of the biggest and busiest cities in the world. And so our life was very busy. And of course, we were raising kids and involved in many things there. So island life is a little slower. So I continued to write. And then it was about, I think, the end of 21 when I was listening to some podcasts and reading some things about creation and art and, the idea of using art. And one of my favorite authors for my entire life has been C.S. Lewis, who is, a very accomplished, probably one of the most accomplished authors at using both fiction and nonfiction to express ideas. And listening to these podcasts, the idea kept coming up at the idea of creating something and expressing truth through stories. And that's something I'd definitely seen in the works of C.S. Lewis and other authors that I appreciated. And I thought, I've written some nonfiction articles and book, but wouldn't it be wonderful if I could think about the ideas that I care the most about and then trying to express those or write those in stories. And so it was at the end of 2021 that I took my first steps, fledgling
Wow.
steps of trying to write my first novel. And it went really well. I've enjoyed it. I got good feedback. I won't say that I'm like incredibly successful, but I've seen consistent sales of every book I've put out, and been blessed to engage with my readers. Talk to them and hear feedback from them, and be able to talk about a lot of these great ideas through different forms of stories that I've written.
And publishing a book, because I mean, it's not so easy. I mean, how was it for you?
No, it's not easy. When I went through the process with my first book, I talked to several publishers throughout, and I actually had a friend who had released a book through a major publisher not long before that. And so I was very familiar with the process that she went through as she was dealing with the publisher. And so that was incredibly helpful to hear about that. But knowing the life that we were living, which was living abroad, being an American, but not living in America, living in a schedule where our schedule can change under different circumstances, I ultimately made the decision to self-publish, which is, it's an option for authors, but there are different routes to go. And so I'm not ruling out dealing with traditional publishers in the future, but just the control, not having the freedom and the control of our schedule, and knowing that if you are working with a publisher, you need to honor that publisher. You need to work carefully with them. They'll have events that they want you to do and things. But working with, there's not many big publishers in the part of the world I'm living in now. And if you're dealing with an American publisher and living outside of America, that's difficult. If you're dealing with a European, UK or something publisher and you're living not in the UK, you have some difficulty. So I made the decision with that. What that means is if you're doing independent, the burden of all of it falls on you or your ability to, hire, good people to work with you. And so, yeah, I had to learn a ton from that. I found other authors who had went before me and had done those, the process. But I feel much more. I just finished at the end of January. My 10th book came out, my 7th novel,
Wow.
and I feel much more confident in what I'm doing now. I've learned a lot since then, and and it's a lot easier than it was in the early days.
But wait a minute, you started, your first publishing was in 2021, and now it's, what did you say, 10 books already?
Yeah, so I released that first Christian book in 2020. I actually released a second nonfiction book under my own name in 2021. But yeah, I've released 7 fiction books and 1 nonfiction book from 2022 until present. So I think you learn things about yourselves, and I think if you'd went back in time and told me in 2020 that I would have written this many books and I would have seen so much, I would have not believed you. There's no way I would have thought that was something I was capable of. But the reality is I've just gotten into this life rhythm of getting up and writing, for a little bit every day. And so it's not like I'm spending, 10 hours a day writing, or pushing through these things. But when you write, 1,000 or 1,500 words or 2,000 words every day, you tend to accumulate a lot of words. And then you just have to have the discipline to go back through it, to rewrite it, to work with editors, to work with designers, and all that part of it. And so the writing part of it, as far as the rough drafts, is actually, I think, the easiest part for me. My head is always buzzing. I'm always going through and have a lot of ideas for stories. That part I can do. The hard part, the work part of it, is the editing, the publishing part of it, and that's what takes a lot more, to make myself do those things when they're needed to be done.
But I can't imagine. Do you sometimes get a block, or do you get, okay, where is the story now heading to?
Yeah, I think some of the stories are very well thought out. For
Okay.
example, I wrote a fantasy trilogy, of course, growing up with Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings and Narnia series, I always thought, oh, it would be really fun to write something out of your pure imagination, with fantasy someday. And so with the fantasy trilogy, in about a week, I had the whole trilogy plotted out where I wanted it to go.
Really?
And it wasn't, that I had every plot point, but
Yeah.
I knew exactly where I wanted each book to end. I knew what was going to happen with the main characters at that point. And so that makes it a lot easier if you're writing to those kind of major plot points. You're writing towards that. The book I just published was probably the most difficult fiction novel I've ever written, because it's a historical fiction novel about my ancestors' immigration from the Alsace Lorraine area of Europe in the 1880s to America. And so, because it's historical fiction and it's grounded in the world that we actually live in, and in even some letters and things that I have from my great grandfather and family, you have to do your work. You have to do your research, if
Yeah.
you want to do it well. So the points of the story, not so hard to write, but getting everything right, wanting to make sure those details are accurate, was very important to me. I figure, this is my ancestors, and even though it is a work of historical fiction and there are things in there that I had to make up, everything that I could get accurate, I wanted it to be accurate, so that people in the future, as they read this book and they're learning about, immigration in the 1880s, or they're learning, even my own children and grandchildren, as they're reading about this, I wanted them to have a really good feel, and as accurate as possible, feel for what life was like then and what their great grandfather or great great grandfather experienced.
It's so interesting. When I saw the book, when you posted it on Instagram, my father, I thought of it, my father actually, him and his family immigrated from Germany, from Dresden,
Uh-huh.
in 1951 after the war.
Wow.
And also on a boat. And I still have the picture where where he's standing on the dock, and the boat in the background.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought to myself, this must be amazing to think, to suddenly imagine, because I think because we haven't experienced anything like that, you really have to go and put yourself into that position and try and think what these people, and children, especially children, what they were thinking at that time.
Yeah, my great grandfather was only 3 years old at that time when they took the journey across the ocean. And it's probably similar circumstances. They were leaving, that area after the war that had happened in the 1870s. And so my great grandfather's father, had fought in that war and experienced that. And from the letters, you can kind of see that it is a part of their motivation, that he didn't want to raise, his family with the shadow of war hanging over them, which seemed to be inevitable during those days, it seems like. And so, yeah, it's fascinating. I enjoy this. I enjoyed the process so much. It was a lot of work, but I have to say it was mostly enjoyable.
And did you also depend on stories that came from, say, your grandmother or your grandfather?
Yeah, my great grandfather recorded several stories. One from
Really?
before when they immigrated, from his memories. And there's a story that occurs in the book that is of him sneaking down and a cook from the kitchen giving him snacks every day, or giving him a treat every day, or a lump of sugar every day. And that's in the story. And that was from my great grandfather. He was telling, one of his memories. And then when they arrived in New York, his father, you hear this story, he knelt down and collapsed on the ground and kissed the ground. And that was from my great grandfather. He told that story of that vivid memory of his father, kind of like kneeling down and kissing the ground as they arrived in New York. And so it's really fun to be able to incorporate those really personal stories. His mother was pregnant on that journey, and hard to imagine what it would have been like to be,
Yeah.
7 months pregnant on a month-long ocean journey. But when the little baby was born, his brother Will was born. The two youngest boys that were closest to the baby's age, they were like, how are we going to understand our brother, because he only will speak American. He won't speak
Oh,
German or French like us. So that's another funny family story that got into the book.
oh, that is so sweet. Oh, so that really happened that they thought
Yeah.
that. Oh, that is so
So what a
sweet.
treasure to have
Yeah.
those little stories recorded.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot, but I appreciate that, we were able to go and cover the letters. And then in the process of writing it, one of my other cousins, he gifted me with the Bible that my great-grandfather and great-grandmother were presented at their wedding. And so this is actually planned to be, a 3-book series. And so the first book was the immigration. The second book will be my great-grandfather and great-grandmother meeting, falling in love, and then ultimately deciding to move to the plains of Oklahoma as pioneers on their own. And so it was, what a special memory, to be able to see that in the actual Bible. And so we have that. I didn't bring it overseas with me, but I have it. I was able to see it and take pictures of it and then put it away in a safe storage place in America to pass along to our family in the future.
But, you're talking about letters now, and that, letters are very often such great references. I've also recently discovered a box with old letters where that my mum wrote to her aunt when she was still very, very young. And it was so amazing reading those letters and actually getting to know my mum. And it's because I haven't, you know your mum and you see the things that she does. And actually from these letters, it was so clear. This is who she is, as a little girl already. She loved the garden and she talked about the flowers and this is my mum. She loves her garden. She's always very involved in gardening and so on. And I think I thought about that. I also discovered love letters that my dad wrote to my mum. And also then you understand the relationship, and I thought to myself, we don't do that anymore. I wonder what our references would be, because you text or you email but there's no handwritten letters anymore.
Yeah, we're going to pass along so much trivial information to the future ancestors, but very little of that kind of like meaningful, really, in-depth things that show their real life.
Yeah. But amazing that you have the possibility also to write the story, because even though it's fiction, it still has a way then to connect with the past. And I'm sure it will. I think it's like music also. When you hear something and you can connect with something, it's the same with writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it appeals to people. Most of my book sales of my early books were electronic versions. It's just common. A lot of people read ebooks before anything else these days. Mm-hmm. But I've noticed this one especially, the hard copy sales have been very, very good. And I think when you're dealing with that kind of history and things, people like that tangible thing in their hands. And so we've had a lot of people who have connections or distant connections to the story, family members or people from that area of the United States who want to connect with stories because they probably can know this will parallel my own ancestors' journeys into this part of the world.
Well, this is what I thought immediately when I saw the description. I thought this would be for me very interesting because of my dad, and it sort of made me think suddenly, well, I've never thought of what it is like to do that journey, so it made me think as well.
Yeah. The most fascinating part of the book was both the journey on the ship, like looking into what it was like for people who were traveling by ship across the ocean at that time. And then the fact that so many millions of people over decades went through this one building in New York. There was one processing center in Castle Rock, Castle Garden, New York. And that was before, later it was Ellis Island. But for decades, there was this one building that was right there on the peninsula that the ships would pull up and people would get out. And thousands of people every day would go through this one building. And they would deal with these same people, people were coming in, and the people would have to, know various languages, or they would have to have translators. And reading about all the details of what that life was like. And I was grateful. There's a lot of wonderful archives out there that had these firsthand experiences. And so even though I had just a few details about my own family's experiences on that day, you were able to read other firsthand accounts of what people had experienced going through there. And it's just a great blessing that those things are out there and people have preserved those stories.
And so, did you just go online and found these archives?
Yeah, for so many months, I had an unbelievable amount of tabs on my web browser
Really?
open, and notebooks. I use digital notebooks, but I have digital notebooks where you have file after file after file, and when you get a letter or when you get just an interesting tidbit or a photograph, filing them away. Because sometimes you come across something and I'm like, well, I'm not going to write about that for probably months, but I have it in front of me. I don't want to lose that information. And so you want to keep a file of it. So it's a big headache, versus the stories that you've just like made up out of your head. What a different experience it was, to do that. But it is a lot of searches, a lot of things online where you're trying to find, and then you find, certain sites where people have dedicated their lives to preserving these little areas of history, about the ship voyages on the ship, or about this, the arrival of new immigrants. So what a blessing that people have done so much hard work that I could benefit from when I was doing the research.
And what's so wonderful also is that it's all online now. So you don't have to travel to America to go to a library or an archive to go and find it.
Actually, I have, this all started, the idea of doing this story, because my aunt, who's passed on now, dedicated a decade of her life to family genealogy and researching and trying to gather all this. And before she passed away, she gave all of that research to my cousin and me, so that it wouldn't die with her. And so if my aunt had not done that, I definitely would have never even had the courage to start on the journey of writing a story like this. But because of the work that she had done, and even just seeing the faces of those ancestors and the pictures that she had collected and the little bits of story that she had, that was definitely an inspiration to move forward from.
Oh, amazing. I love that. I love old pictures also, to look at old pictures of my family that I don't even know, but you sort of see also resemblances or just expressions, and it does tell a story.
Yeah.
But now what I've also found interesting is that you write thriller and fantasy.
Yeah, probably against my own best interests. I'm not stuck with one genre. Every author I talk to says, if you want to make the most amount of money or be the most successful, picking one genre and sticking to it is the way to go. But honestly, my brain just doesn't work like that. I always have had an eclectic set of tastes, and so I just can't do it, and so I even though it may in the long run hinder the spread of my work, I am much more satisfied with writing the stories that I really want to tell, no matter what the genre is they're in. And with my kids, growing up reading them fantastic stories and enjoying things like Tolkien and things from my youth, I was thrilled to write a fantasy trilogy. And I don't know if I'll ever write another fantasy thing, but I'm so grateful that I did that.
Mm.
I think if I'm thinking what will the future hold, I probably will settle more into the thriller vein once I'm done with this historical fiction trilogy.
Mm.
I think those stories, there's so many stories you could tell, and I've enjoyed the ones that I've written so far. I probably will keep coming back to that, but I wouldn't be surprised if I still dally in other areas. Just thinking,
Really?
my time in Turkey, 20 years in Turkey, there's so many interesting stories with that culture, and I have a few notebooks full of ideas, of those kind of stories that I could see myself writing in the future as well.
So in the 20 years, did you journal, or did you write down specific stories?
We had a lot of experiences, and I think we were blessed to be able to meet so many interesting people
Mm.
and to be involved in a lot of intriguing situations. Some that might like have seemed difficult or scary at the time, but now when you look back on, you think, what a privilege to have known those people, who walked through a difficult circumstance with someone. As you can imagine, when you have a country that is 99+% Muslim, when you have someone who is a Christian living in that environment, they sometimes deal with persecution. They sometimes deal with challenges. We had people we knew closely who were arrested. There in 2007, there were 3 Christians who were killed for their faith in Malatya, Turkey. So there's a lot of stories like that, that I would love to see told in the future. I'd love to see those memories shared, so that more people could know about what happened in the lives of those people. And so ultimately, those are those people's stories to tell. I would definitely never want to write somebody else's story without talking to them first. But if they were wanting to have those stories put out there, I would be happy to offer whatever ability I have to help, with that process.
You can't think of in today's time that still happened, but that Christianity is under that pressure.
Yeah, and it's not. Turkey's a little bit different. We all know about the countries where there might be a more intense legal thing from the government against Christianity. Christianity, with their constitution, they have freedom of religion. They have freedom even for people to share their faith. But what you suffer is, because the vast majority of the people are Muslim, you have persecution along relational lines, from family members, from you might not get the job, you might get looked over for a job, you might get fired, and they probably wouldn't come out and say it's because you're a Christian, but
I see. Yeah.
they don't have to. So the kind of things that happen often are more along those lines.
Mm.
And Turkish Christians especially, they struggle with the idea of identity. Who am I? Because everyone is told, to be a Turk is to be a Muslim. And so what does that mean for you if you're a Turk and you're a Christian and you have a different faith? Or, there are even, Jewish people who are Turkish citizens, and they deal with that complexity as well. And some of those that I've met over the years. So that a whole idea of identity, which is common around the world today, we hear people struggling with identity, who am I? I think there are some really amazing stories that could be told in Turkey about that.
Well, I'm sure you're going to do it, because you are what you've accomplished over the years. It's amazing. But are you a good businessman?
I mean, I think I was fortunate when I was very, very young. I was taught sound, business principles, whether it's, personal finance or things. So when you stay in a certain lane, I wouldn't say I'm like an amazing innovative business person, but I've been fortunate to know how to not make mistakes, and how to learn how to identify the right people that you could work with. And so I've been fairly cautious with what I've done with my writing. what you'll find if you're producing as an author, you'll get flooded with other offers of people trying to say, I'll promote your book for you, I'll do things for you.
Oh, I
And
see.
so I think
Okay,
it would be very easy to make mistakes, by hiring the wrong people or working with the wrong people. And so I tried to be fairly cautious. I'm more of a slow and steady wins the race kind of person when it comes to business. And so I've been happy to, continually, consistently produce new content, new stories, knowing that in the end, there's no rush. Those stories will still be there. I'm grateful for the people incredibly grateful for the people who've purchased my books and who've given me the feedback. I think there will be more in time, and I'm happy to see those things come, as they do. Without pushing it too much. I have done some things and hired some people to help me with some things, found a great cover designer who's, done a great job with my book covers, and happy to keep working with that person. I've had good editors, good feedback on those things. So I think as you learn, trying not to make big mistakes and to slowly grow your audience and grow the people who understand what you're writing. I want people who enjoy my stories to keep reading. I want to find new readers, and in time, I think that will come.
I love the fact that you say you want to write what you want to write and not be put into a category, and
yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful. I'm 53. I've worked. I've made good decisions with our personal finances. And so it does allow me the freedom. I feel for some of my younger writer friends who are trying to blaze a path to being an author, and are more dependent on seeing quicker results, so that they can dedicate more time to their writing. So I'm very sympathetic for the situation that they find themselves in. But I work a job where I can do my job and I can write, and do both. And so that's a great blessing. And so I have the privilege of being able to take it at my own pace and write what I want to write, without having to worry about so much about generating profits and revenues as a business.
But is there a magic? Is there something like? How can I put it? Is there something that you would say this makes the book? This is something that makes people want to read a book?
From my background in counseling, I think you need to tap into real human emotion, real human passion. And I think if you're telling a story that engages with real human passion, I think people will find it entertaining, they'll find it enjoyable, they'll find it meaningful. And so some of my books are funny and they deal more with that side of things. Some of them, like the book that I just released, they're sad, and there are moments of grief and moments of loss. And I think if you write things like that honestly, people will enjoy it. They'll enjoy crying along with you, as you're grieving over these things. Just like people enjoy laughing with you if you're tapped into real humor, And so I think that's the key is don't write flat, don't write emotionless, write to those emotions, honestly share them, and try to create real people who people can relate to. I love to see that in a review where somebody says the characters were very relatable. I found them very real. And I think that's my better writing, I think, and better stories have done that, at a higher level. And I think that resonates with the readers.
And do you yourself, while writing emotional parts or parts about loss, does it affect you as well?
I definitely have had that happen. In this recent book, Writing Loss, in the first novel that I wrote, there's losses of major characters. That it's funny that you as an author, you often know it's coming, but when you write the scene and you write how those characters that you've spent so much time with are responding to the scene. It's hard not to get emotional sometimes. I'm an emotional person. A lot of counselors are. So I think, showing sympathy, empathy with people as you're counseling them uh, I am someone who would sometimes wear my emotion on my sleeve, emotions on my sleeve.
I recently spoke to an artist in France, and he said that he carries the emotions or the works that he's done on his shoulders. You know, that's what he carries with him. And I wonder if it's also the same with all the books you're writing. If that then becomes sort of that's part of you.
Definitely. When you revisit things like my first novel, I'd put it aside, and and it's probably the most controversial one I've wrote because it deals with a lot of the suffering that people faced during the pandemic, and so obviously people have a lot of opinions about that, and the goal wasn't to get into all the opinions, but it was just to acknowledge that people suffered real loss during the pandemic, and various things. And so, that was a novel when I was done with it, and it's a 2-book series. And so when I was done with those, I was probably more happy to set those aside than anything.
Really? Mm-hmm.
But when I recently was working with a professional voice actor to narrate the audiobook of that first novel, and working back through the text, and helping the voice actor to find the right voice for those characters. I have to admit, it was kind of emotional, to draw back on that and to see that story and find that it still resonated with me. I still feel for those characters. I still feel for their losses, and so yeah, I'd say that definitely makes it seem like I'm still carrying those things with me, even though I don't think about them all the time.
Mm. Well, this is so wonderful to talk to you, and I'm so inspired by the fact that you've written so much and that you're self-publishing and that you're doing everything. It's really, I think it's motivating also for people who are authors or who want to write to know that it is possible. And you find that also with musicians and singer-songwriters, they sort of take control also sometimes, with their own work and their own music, and produce their own music. And then there's also a sort of a freedom that you were talking about.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I mean, it's a blessing to share these things. And I think everybody should know that it is possible. If you dream about these things, we live in a world now where it doesn't mean that, you should not take it lightly. You should take the responsibility seriously. And, deciding to self-publish wasn't, well, I can just write anything and put it out there. I do, I care deeply about, doing the best I can possibly do and getting the right feedback. But I think people should think, I can do this. If I'm willing to dedicate myself to it, I'm willing to spend the time, and I'm willing to put the effort in. It is possible to do these things, to create art and to see it out there in the world and to share it with others. And that's what it's about.
But Chad, what is the dream now? What are the wishes for you?
Yeah, I think tapping into so many of these stories has made me convinced that there are so many good stories to tell. There's so many meaningful things to tell. And the whole motivation for starting writing was this idea that there are really good and true ideas that exist in the world. And these can be told well through stories. When I studied English literature back in university, they talk about the different archetypes and the different, modalities and things that are common throughout stories through the ages. And, C.S. Lewis talked about this, and, the timeless themes and the themes of, good versus evil, the themes of, the hero, the heroine, these things that recur over and over again, temptation. Actually, many of them come from the Bible. Like there are actually a lot of themes that we saw. They were first written. It's one of the oldest works, whether it's Homer's Odyssey or the Bible. These are themes that go back to the oldest forms of literature that we have in front of us. And so the idea of picking one of these themes or one of these truths and building a story around it and building it into the story and then telling it in a personal way that can relate to people, that's very motivational to me. I love the idea of doing that over and over again. And I think there's unlimited stories out there to tell. And I think as long as, I'm able to, I want to continue to tell those stories.
I think it's amazing. And you're right. I think sometimes reading a story or telling a story also, at the moment somebody can relate to it, it also can either bring hope or it can give a different perspective, or it's also a form of therapy.
Yeah, when I wrote the fantasy trilogy, I intentionally dealt with trauma. And so you have characters in the very beginning of the first book experiencing extreme trauma because of war and because of things that are going on in the story. And it was intentionally written with the idea of being able to see how people who've dealt with trauma, as they engage with it in appropriate ways in the confines of a community, of a supportive community, could see progress and see growth and be able to overcome their trauma and the effects of that on their life. And so I think, sometimes, you could tell somebody, well, to get over trauma, you need to do these steps. And it comes across cold. It doesn't connect with the person. But to read of a story of somebody, whether it's a true story or even a story in a novel, of how somebody has engaged with their own trauma and how they have been able to overcome that, I think is some ways much more impactful and effectual to people.
No, I totally agree. But Chad, it was great talking to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Very nice to meet you, Petra.
And where can people purchase your books?
Yeah, so my website is hunterchadwickauthor.com. And that has links to everything, has links to the stores for purchase links, it has links to the social media. So that's the best place to go. So if people go to hunterchadwickauthor.com, they'll find everything they need to know. And
you answer you reply to your Instagram messages. I can vouch for that. So yeah. People can write to you.
No, it's really fun. I have a number of readers that actually connect with me and connect back that way. Of course, you love to see reviews, public reviews and stuff. Yeah. But it's also fun when people just have a question about something that they've read and they want to reach out and know more. As an author, I really enjoy that.
I also agree. I love sometimes when people write to me and say, oh, I've connected with this person that you interviewed. So then when it's somebody I interviewed who connects with another person I've interviewed and they do some sort of collaboration, I love that, because then I think, okay, this is almost like a family, like a group or a sort of a network, a good network.
Yeah, I just started skimming through some of your YouTube channel and looking at it. You've talked to a lot of fascinating different people in the arts and different fields. Yeah. So it must have been very interesting.
It's very interesting. I mean, for me, it's life-changing, and it's such a great learning process also, talking to people, because everybody has a different story and a different outlook, and to hear that it's really it's changed my life. So I'm very fortunate to be able to do that.
Well, thanks again for letting me have this opportunity.